Hello and welcome to CIO Leadership Live in ASEAN. My name is James Henderson, Editorial Director of CIO based in Singapore, and I'll be your host today as we welcome Abhishek Singh, Chief Digital Officer at Royal Golden Eagle, RGE, based in Singapore, and our CIO 75 honoree from 2021. Abhishek, welcome.
Hi, James. How are you doing today?
Not too bad, thank you. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good stuff. Now, we've got a lot to talk about today in terms of maximizing some of those new and emerging technologies in the market and really driving business innovation and transformation. Before we do, it'll be good to get a handle on your role, Chief Digital Officer at RGE. What role are you playing in supporting or spearheading innovation within the business?
Right. So, as you introduced, I'm the Chief Digital Officer of RGE Group. We are pretty much a manufacturing entity, a conglomerate consisting of many different companies doing different lines of businesses. My role is to do digital transformation and innovation at the back of that digital transformation across these set of companies which are managed by RGE. And as far as innovation goes, it is pretty much driven by introduction and adoption of new technologies, probably not so new anymore, but more like I would say innovative technologies to begin with, like you have artificial intelligence, machine learning, computer vision, data science, as well as introducing new development practice like DevSecOps and agile delivery. So at the back of those, we try and intersect the so-called the cutting edge technology with business innovation to deliver on new business value. And that's really my role, which is to find that intersection of where technology meets business to deliver new business value.
And on that key point, and we'll go into that in terms of how you're actually doing that. Before we do, Abhishek, it would be good to get, you mentioned AI, CV, machine learning, data science, etc. And as you rightly said, they're not necessarily new anymore. Do you think, just in your own experience in looking across ASEAN and further afield, do you think organizations are fully maximizing the potential of those technologies today? We'll get into RGE, but just in general, what do you think?
No. I think far from it. I think, in fact, we are barely scraping the surface in most cases still. And to a very large extent, I find that there is a disconnect when it comes to understanding of technology versus understanding of business. So we have companies which have absolutely fantastic understanding of the technology, and these are typically your technology companies, right? Whether you have Microsoft, Google, Amazon, they are building some fantastic tech stacks around AI, computer vision, machine learning, object detection, facial recognition. So great job they are doing in terms of building the technology stack. And when it comes to more B2C use cases, I think that's where in a lot of cases, you'll find that they are also kind of hitting it on the nail on the head, where NLP, natural language processing, and chatbots, I think they're doing a great job. But when it comes to industrial technologies and B2B, I think a lot of times we are stuck with that gap of people who understand the technology versus people who understand the business. Traditional manufacturing, for example, has been very well understood by process engineers, automation engineers, instrumentation engineers, but they have a sense of how AI, ML works or may potentially work, but they may be extremely reluctant to introduce that inside a factory, for example. And while we all hear about use cases, smart factory and connected factory on a day in, day out basis, I have been to some of these factories around the world, both in process manufacturing as well as discrete manufacturing. And I would say there aren't that many companies which are maximizing the potential. Introducing the technology, yes. Finding application of technology, yes. But maximizing, far from it.
And just on that, Abhishek, I know you reference manufacturing there as a sector of note, but I suppose you could probably extend that theory to other parts of the industry, and that they're not really fully utilizing it. And that gap between those who get the technology but maybe don't know how to convert it to the business. How are you finding areas of application, so to speak, for AI, ML, CV, whatever it may be? How do you actually find that use case or reason for deployment in the first place?
So I think first and foremost, you have to fundamentally understand and accept that the technology or so-called artificial intelligence is very different from human intelligence. And the application of technology has to be in areas which are inherently weak for, say, a human intelligence. So, I mean, a very simplistic example could be large volume of data, right? Yep. In our context, we have one of our business groups called April, where we have large volumes of plantation, right? And these are tree plantation, eucalyptus plantation, and we need to manage them for many years before they are ready for production. Now, in terms of processing the information of capturing the growth cycle of each tree, for example, that's a large volume of information. Yeah. You need to take pictures, you need to make videos, and you need to process them not just in a single slice of time, but maybe over a certain period of time, and then do comparison across times. That's not ideally suited for a human processing, right? We are very good at instinctive decisions. We are very good at creative decisions. But when it comes to processing very large volumes of very mundane information, I think that's where the human mind tends to go blank. But machines are excellent at it, right? So I can throw millions of images, photographs, or video at a machine learning algorithm, and it will not get bored. And it will pick up nuances, and it will pick up discrepancies, and it will pick up those anomalies, which are very, very interesting for an agronomist to then make a decision of what is not going as per normal. Yeah. Right. Compared to a human being who, if expected to manually process large number of images of trees, after a while may start drawing a blank, right? He may start falling asleep. So I think those kind of things where inherently human mind is probably not the best applicant of decision making is where I generally try to then bring in technology. So in that sense, you can even say it is not machine learning or artificial intelligence, but more like augmented intelligence, right? You have your human intelligence, but now you bring machine learning to augment that decision making into a more structured way of working by bringing capabilities which a human may either not have a good skill set for, or may require very large volumes of manpower to do it. And the problem with having a large volume of manpower to coordinate a certain decision is that it's always prone to errors, right? Compared to putting a machine, it can still process that large volume of information, but it will not make errors. It will follow the algorithm. So I think that becomes a very primary selection criteria to say, okay, these use cases are very good for application of technology rather than just leaving them to human judgment for much longer.
So the thought process goes into that, the justification, the use case, and it's a great example, Abhishek, in terms of, you know, AI or ML, whatever it may be, in terms of the need and why the business should roll it out. Be great to get your take as a chief digital officer on that process to deployment, or actually we're not even there yet, to budget, to actually get the buy-in from everybody else. It's something we talk about a lot, I know, but is that any advice or words of wisdom about how you convert that initial idea and initial justification, as you've just mentioned, next step to the board? We'll get to the deployment and the team and scaling it in a minute, but the investment side, how do you tackle that? Any advice?
So I think a lot of times in the industry, we use terms like POC, proof of concept, pilots, and those kind of terms. And here, what I generally like to recommend to my team is proof of value and proof of first value, right? Because I think we are in the business of delivering business value. And when we talk about, like you said, converting an idea to a first project, I generally encourage my team to think in terms of proof of first value. How do you create that first value for your customer? And how do you demonstrate that business value of things? So it is not just about, and maybe taking the same example, it's not just about processing millions of images. That's a given, right? It's about processing the millions of images towards a certain business outcome. And what is that proof of first value that you're trying to do? So let me again take a simple example, right? Which is maybe counting of trees, right? So you have a very large landmass, and for human beings to go and count those, say, 10,000 trees will take a very long time. Even if you deploy a large number of people, there's a good chance somebody will miss out one tree here or one tree there, right? So, and that missing out is unpredictable. That error margin is unpredictable, right? Versus you push through those images through a machine learning, computer vision kind of a platform, and you say, okay, I can count these trees with a 99.9% accuracy. It will fail 0.01% of the time, but that 0.01% of the failure rate is predictable. We know the situation and the scenarios under which it will fail. So then the question becomes, okay, now I can prove to you as my user, as my business, that a machine can count trees faster and more accurately than human beings. And that becomes your proof of first value, right? Now, once you've done that proof of first value, then you say, okay, now that I can count the trees, I can also tell you how much is the diameter that each canopy is occupying in that landmass. So then that becomes your, say, for example, crown area ratio, right? When we look at the trees from the top, we call that the crown, right? So that becomes your crown area ratio. I can tell you if each tree is now occupying the exact same crown area or not, right? Because you want to see whether all your trees are growing to the same health or some are growing better than others, right? So again, if you leave that to a human, he has to walk around, he has to measure the diameter of the stem, he has to look at the height of the tree, and it becomes a little bit more challenging, right? But versus you fly a drone on top of the canopy and then you see how much is the canopy occupying as a circle, and it's a mathematical problem which a machine can solve faster, right? So then you say that, okay, now I counted your trees first, now let me show you how I can do the crown area ratio, and that becomes your second value proposition. And once you start getting into that conversation, then it automatically builds up. And then you start talking about building a whole business platform around it. And like you said, then the conversation starts about how do you scale this, and do you just do it for, say, 1,000 hectare or 100,000 hectare, or you just do it in one country or multiple locations. And then the scale-up conversation starts, right? But a couple of things that we learn along this process is, number one, you really have to find the right application of technology. Because sometimes, while now we are discussing, it's quite easy for us to say, okay, this is how we did it. Sometimes it takes a little bit of an experimentation. Number two, a lot of times, people who are data scientists or AI engineers, they have to understand the business. If fundamentally they don't understand the basic principles of agronomy, for example, they can't work in precision forestry. They may know the technology, but they can't work in precision forestry. They will fail very fast. They can't work in manufacturing environment if they don't understand the basics of process manufacturing. They will fail very fast. So one of the things which we discover along the way when we do the proof of first value is whether the team that is working at it is capable enough to discover that proof of value. Because at the end of the day, the proof of value is discovered at the intersection of where technology meets business, and not just by the knowledge of technology itself.
And just on that, and it's a really good detailed example that's almost taken us all the way through each step here. Just before we go into that high performance team element and how they actually get to that intersection and maximize it, you made a good point around the experimentation and and it's not always the case that every project, lands immediately. Is there a margin for error that the business allows within, new projects and new ideas in your experience? Just based on what you said there was one of those key factors that, you might find a use case for AI, you might roll it out, it might not work as well as you thought. Okay, that's fine. Does the business have patience for that type of project, just in your own experience?
That in a way ends up being a little bit of a strategic and a board level conversation. So I would say generally in that space, I have found two things to be quite effective. Number one, the alignment between the CEO of that business and myself and the shareholders. And we are private limited, so we don't have like thousands of shareholders. Our board is pretty much consisting of 99% of the shareholders anyway. So alignment of the board, the CEO, and the digital leadership, including myself, that alignment is the first thing which is quite important, right? Where first thing first, there has to be an alignment of intent that we want to do this, right? There may be, like you said, failures along the way, but there's alignment of intent that we want to do it because we want to discover something new, and we want to find some new value, and we want to create some differentiating capabilities. Otherwise, we are just like our competitors, and there's no reason for us to have a lower cost base or a differentiating advantage over our peers, right? So therefore, there's alignment of intent. That becomes your first point of action. The second point of action then becomes is in terms of appetite for risk, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's a $10,000 risk which you're willing to take, or a $50,000 risk that you're willing to take. And here, what I found was that at least in our organization, we said that we are comfortable taking risk as long as it is building our own internal capability. What that means is we will not do a project with a vendor which has a high risk of failure. Because there, if there is a learning, the learning went with the vendor, with that IT vendor or a digital vendor, right? He or she learned how not to do a digital project, not us. So for us, that becomes a kind of an investment which has to be written off, right? Not to say we didn't do it, we learned the hard way, but eventually that's where we landed. We said if we want to do this kind of experiments, it should be with the goal of building internal capabilities. So that became the second point of alignment. So first, there has to be alignment of intent. And then secondly, it has to be towards building internal capability. So do experiments which, even if they fail, they help the organizational knowledge in one way or another. So if we are doing an AI project or a data science project or a computer vision project, if it fails, that's fine, because we did it internally. So now we know that this is something which doesn't work in our company, and we should never try it again for whatever reason, right? And therefore we should look for alternative approaches. So that becomes the second thing. Towards that alignment of building internal capability is where then we say how much, what is the budget? And in that budget conversation, it becomes more about investment in people rather than investment in technology, right? Because now you're saying I'm building internal capability. So you are talking about hiring people. I'm going to hire 2 AI engineers, 3 AI engineers, rather than I'm going to buy something from the market. So in that sense, it's a little bit more palatable. So then when you talk to a CEO or you talk to the board, you say that even if this project fails, the money I spent was on the salary of one of our own staff. And that knowledge stays with the company. But if we succeed, then it helps us create something which our competition does not have. So in that sense, it becomes a little bit more convincing for them to invest in a project which can have high probability of failure. So that becomes alignment of our internal capability. Then the third conversation is really quantum, which is how much risk is worth taking. Do you want to invest $10,000 or do you want to invest $1 million, right? So for us, after a little bit of debate and discussion, we said we are okay with 50,000, right? If up to $50,000, for whatever reason, we have to write it off, but it was done with an internal team, we are okay, right? Because at least we learn along the way. If that 50,000, part of it was spent on hardware, part of it was spent on software, it's still okay, because the hardware stays with us, we can redeploy it for something else. Software stays with us, we redeploy it for something else, as long as it was towards building internal capability. So 50,000 is what we gravitated towards, and that's been working fine. So we do the alignment of intent, and then we do in appetite for risk. We make sure that the risk is towards building of internal capabilities, and then third one is the quantum of roughly around 50,000. But thankfully, most of my proof of value projects, they are sub 50,000. So we've been lucky there.
Well, it's a great point, and just to zone in on that as well, Abhishek, around that, failure is okay, providing we keep the learnings and the knowledge, I think is a very good lesson for your fellow chief digital officers and CIOs and CTOs watching that. You know, not everything goes according to plan, and you've got to speculate to accumulate. But to your point, you need to be able to have those learnings to grow from it, rather than with the outsourcer. So a really great overview there, Abhishek. And just a real final one. You mentioned around teams and once they've been deployed in the scaling side of it. How do you go from, you've identified the idea, it's really at that cross section, as you mentioned, you've really hit the nail on the head in terms of found a great technology and a great use case. The board have backed you, you've got that alignment across every step of the way. Now you want to roll it out in all of your other markets that you're in across the world. How's the scaling and the building of the teams element? How does that come? I know there's a lot of key steps to get to first, and you almost don't want to get too far ahead of yourself. But when it gets to that point when things are working well, how do you scale it and how do you build the team around it?
So I think when you have this kind of an organic growth, right, it really becomes about building that capability in the team itself. So if you start off on the right footing, building the proof of value with the right set of people, and of course along the way you will find some people who are performing well and some people who are not performing, and you continue to adjust your team structure and your team composition, but it matures, it grows, it matures, and I guess that's pretty much the agile way of working anyway, right? Which is you try and execute in sprints and you continue to add more people as you are running more parallel sprints. So in that sense, you have those high performers who stick with you right from the start of the project. And after a certain while, they kind of become your anchors or pillars of delivery, right? Yeah. These are guys who've been with you from day one of the project, maybe a smaller number from day one, but a larger number from day two, a much larger number from day three. But because you are executing everything in terms of sprints and in various iterations, each iteration is adding one or two people who are then adding to that organizational capability. So over time, that so-called capable team becomes bigger and bigger. And as that capable team expands, I think they really shoulder the burden of scaling and scaling successfully, because they keep that knowledge with them, right? The knowledge stays with them. So if in the early days something didn't work out, that knowledge stays with them, and therefore they don't repeat that mistake, and therefore they don't kind of make the same error all over again, right? And that kind of helps to deploy at scale, because the one thing which is different between early stage experimentation and deployment at scale is really your experience, right? Because early stage experimentation, you can even get a fresh graduate to come and help you. But when you talk about scaling and deployment at scale, it is no longer about just a technology or even business value. It also becomes about how much do you know about the organization itself, about the company, about the culture, about the people who work here, which so-called organization levers to use to deliver fast, which organization levers will put you against a roadblock, for example. And then comes the aspect of change management, which again, you can only do successfully if you have a good understanding of the culture and the people. Because if you don't, fundamentally, digital is about change. Digital is about changing your ways of working. And fundamentally, change is always uncomfortable for people. Nobody likes to change their ways of working. And it has to be very convincing and done in a way which people find palatable. They may not like it and enjoy it all the time, but at least they find it palatable. And that ability to, in a way, to serve the digital solution in a way which kind of allows people to see it in a positive light, I think that helps. Now, one of the things which at an organizational level, which top down we try and achieve at the board level is, we said that because of digital, if there are any manpower optimization, we will never have any retrenchment around it, right? We will never have any layoffs because of digital. So that's something we did at the top level, right? So we said that please don't hesitate to work on digital project just because it's automated your job, because even if your job is automated, it doesn't matter. We will still have some work for you. We will redeploy you. We'll find some work for you. You don't have to worry about your so-called salary or your. So that becomes a so-called one friction point less, right? The other friction point which we try and remove is through alignment of KPIs, which is some form of joint KPIs. So for example, in my KPI, we measure how much business value we deliver to the group. And in, say, for example, the business stakeholders and the business CEOs KPI, we will have some percentage to say how much digital transformation they are doing. And then it just filters downwards. But that becomes a culture and an organizational change management kind of a conversation. I would say a large part of it is driven by organization will and culture. And where I would say we are kind of lucky is because I think right from the top, our shareholders and board, they are very clear that they want to do it. They are willing to invest in a dedicated team looking after digital transformation. And therefore, they drive this point at every conversation they have in every board committee, every business meeting. And because of which it is part of KPI of a lot of business stakeholders.
Abhishek, I just want to say thank you enormously for taking us through this step-by-step between, converting those new technologies, whatever they may be, AI, machine learning, computer vision, I know we spoke about today, in data science, but such a great example and lesson for other chief digital officers and CIOs and CTOs around how they actually grab those technologies, but crucially get it through the organization and maximize it at the other end. So Abhishek, I know you've been leading the way digitally, not just in Singapore, but across the world for RGE. So thank you enormously for taking the time to be with us today, and stay well.
Thank you, James. Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for watching CIO Leadership Live.
Thank you.